The walls of the temple glistened with gold and fear, echoing with voices that were never meant to speak. In Babylon, devotion had a price, and innocence was a currency. Young girls were brought into sacred halls, crowned with ropes instead of flowers, and given titles that promised honor but delivered chains. They were called Kadisu, priestesses of the goddess Ishtar. Yet their sacred duty was a life trapped in exploitation. This is the story of Beltane, a 14-year-old girl whose childhood was stolen, whose choices were erased, and whose name would fade from the clay tablets that recorded her suffering. How does a society dress cruelty in the robes of piety and convince its people it is holy? Watch all the way to the end. There's so much valuable info waiting for you. Don't forget to subscribe, tap like, and share this video. Every bit of support helps our channel grow and inspires us to make even better videos for you. Beltane had never seen the city of Babylon before. At 14, her small frame was trembling, not only from the sun's heat but from the weight of what awaited her. Her village was far from the great ziggurats, far from the streets filled with merchants shouting their wares, far from the towering walls that marked the city's power. She had been told she was chosen, honored, selected by the priests to serve the goddess Ishtar. Her parents' faces had been pale, their eyes hiding sorrow beneath forced pride, but Beltane did not yet understand. She thought being chosen meant greatness. The journey to the temple was quiet, except for the occasional murmur from the priests escorting her. Beltane clutched a small bundle of her belongings, her heart pounding in her chest. She had heard stories of the temple, whispered in her village. Tales of young women dressed in beautiful robes, performing sacred dances, singing praises to Ishtar. She imagined a life filled with music, incense, and devotion. She did not know that the temple would never be a home, only a cage. Upon arrival, the temple's gates rose like stone giants, intimidating and magnificent. The air was heavy with incense, smoke curling in the sunlight like trapped spirits. Priests in long, flowing garments greeted her, their faces kind yet unreadable. They led her into a hall lined with statues of Ishtar, her eyes carved to seem alive, watching, judging. Beltane felt a chill. The hall was silent except for the soft tap of her sandals on the marble floor. A woman older than Beltane, wearing a golden rope crown, approached. She spoke softly but firmly. "You are now a Kadisu. You will serve Ishtar, and in your service you will find honor." Beltane's heart lifted at the word honor. She did not know what it truly meant. The woman placed a rope crown on Beltane's head, its fibers coarse and stiff against her hair. The crown was a symbol, she was told, of her sacred duty. Yet Beltane felt its weight pressed down not just on her head, but on her spirit. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Beltane learned songs, learned gestures, learned prayers that promised favor from Ishtar. She wore bright robes and participated in ceremonies that seemed both beautiful and frightening. The priests explained that men would come, bringing silver and grain, and it was her duty to welcome them. Beltane did not understand the meaning of these words, but she could see it in the eyes of the older girls. Fear, resignation, silence. Their laughter was rare, their faces carefully blank. At night, Beltane would lie awake, listening to the faint echoes of the temple. Some sounds were prayer, some were pain, and for a moment, she could not tell the difference. She began to understand that the temple was not just a place of worship. It was a place where childhoods were ended, where lives were recorded on cold clay tablets, and where escape was never promised. The system was vast, intricate, and invisible to those outside. To the city of Babylon, it was sacred. To Beltane, it was the beginning of a life that was no longer her own. Beltane woke before the sun, as the temple's priests instructed. The first light of day filtered through the tall windows, painting the stone floors with pale gold. She rubbed her eyes and tried to remember her village, the fields, her mother's soft voice, but the memory felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. The temple demanded her attention, her obedience, her body, and her silence. Her mornings began with rituals she barely understood. Older Kadisu moved gracefully through the halls, their rope crowns swaying, their hands lifted in precise gestures. Beltane was taught to mimic them, to chant prayers to Ishtar, to bow at the right moments. Every movement, every word was observed. Any mistake could bring shame or worse, punishment. At first, she believed she was learning devotion, but slowly, fear crept into her heart. The temple was not only a house of worship, it was a machine designed to control every thought, every action. After the rituals, the priests led the girls to the inner chambers, where men from the city would arrive. Beltane had heard whispers about this, but seeing it was different. The older girls moved with practiced calm, their faces masks hiding what Beltane now recognized as pain. The priests recorded every visit in clay tablets, noting the exchange of silver, the amount of grain, the favor performed. These records were meticulous, unemotional, final. The girls' lives were no longer their own. They belonged to the temple, to the goddess, and to the men who came with offerings. Beltane tried to focus on the prayers, on the songs she had been taught. She repeated the sacred words, her lips trembling, her hands shaking. The other girls avoided her eyes, as though sharing a look might break the illusion that they were free, honored servants. One girl, older and thin, whispered to Beltane one night, "Do not hope for escape. This is your life now. They call it service, but it is chains. Your body is sacred only because they say so. Your freedom does not exist." That night, Beltane lay on the cold stone floor, staring at the ceiling. The rope crown still pressed against her scalp, its fibers biting into her skin. She felt small, like a bird trapped in a golden cage. She thought of the temple's records, the tablets with their neat, unforgiving inscriptions. Each girl's service was documented, every gift, every favor, every silver coin. And yet, Beltane realized no record would ever show the terror in her chest, the panic in her nights, the hollowing of her childhood. Days bled into weeks. Beltane learned to move with the other girls, to smile when necessary, to bow, to chant, to hide her fear. The priest spoke often of Ishtar, the goddess of love, war, and fertility, who demanded devotion and rewarded obedience. They called the Kadisu blessed, chosen, holy. But Beltane knew the truth. There was no blessing in chains, no holiness in silence, no choice in a life taken without consent. She began to notice the older girls disappearing, their names vanishing from the rolls. Sometimes new girls arrived, frightened and small like she had been, and sometimes the clay tablets recorded yet another absence. The system was invisible to most, sacred to all, but deadly to the girls it held. Beltane understood that she was part of a living, breathing institution of control. And in the quiet of the temple night, she began to make a decision. She would endure, she would survive, and she would remember. Weeks turned into months, and Beltane's world shrank to the temple walls. The songs and prayers that once seemed beautiful now felt like chains of their own, binding her in rhythm and words. Every morning, every ritual, every recorded transaction reminded her that she belonged entirely to the system. She had begun to understand what the older Kadisu meant. This life was not devotion. It was captivity disguised as honor. Beltane watched carefully, learning not just the ceremonies, but the subtle ways the priests maintained control. A slight gesture, a whispered command, a disapproving glance. These were enough to remind the girls of their place. The priests carried clay tablets and styluses, recording every interaction with cold precision. Silver coins were counted, grain measured, favors noted. The temple's bureaucracy was flawless, leaving no trace of emotion, no recognition of the pain endured. Every girl was a line on a tablet, a number in the ledger of devotion. She began to speak in whispers with another young girl, Sapphira, who had arrived months before Beltane. Sapphira had been 14 when she came, like Beltane, and already her spirit bore the weight of experience. "They call it service," Sapphira said one evening, brushing back her hair. "But they mean control. We are sacred only in name. Every coin, every grain, every man, they own it. Not Ishtar, not the gods. Them." Beltane listened, horrified, yet strangely comforted. Finally, someone had spoken the truth aloud. For the first time, she saw the ropes on their heads not as crowns of honor but as shackles of obedience. The temple's grandeur, its golden statues and carved walls, was a veneer, a distraction from the system of exploitation hidden beneath. The priests dressed cruelty in ritual, presenting it as a sacred duty, and most of Babylon never questioned it. Despite this, Beltane began to notice the small ways the girls resisted. A glance exchanged, a misstep corrected privately, a moment of solidarity in silence. They shared secret words, gestures, stories from home, scraps of memory that reminded them they were human, not just property. Beltane learned that survival required more than obedience. It required cleverness, patience, and subtle defiance. One day, an older Kadisu whispered to her, "Remember your name, remember it well. They can record your body, your labor, your coins. But your name, your memory, your mind, they cannot take that unless you let them." Beltane clutched her hands together, repeating her name over and over, as if saying it aloud could make her real in a place that sought to erase her. But the temple had a way of teaching girls to forget. One by one, girls disappeared, removed from the records, replaced by new arrivals. Beltane realized she was being trained to endure, not to question. Each lesson, each ritual, each recorded transaction was a reminder that her childhood had ended, that the rope crown was permanent, that the system would outlast her fears and hopes. As the days passed, Beltane's fear became sharper, more focused. She could see the entire network of control, the quiet terror behind the gilded halls, the mechanical precision of exploitation. And yet, in that darkness, a spark remained. The knowledge that remembering her name, her identity, was her first act of rebellion. She began to understand that even in captivity, even under the weight of rope and ritual, there were ways to survive, not just in body, but in spirit. Beltane had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the temple, but comfort was an illusion she could never truly grasp. Every day, the ceremonies reminded her of what the priests expected: unwavering devotion, perfect obedience, and complete surrender of her body and will. One morning, as she knelt in the grand hall, the doors opened, and a group of men entered, their eyes sweeping over the girls. Beltane's stomach tightened. The priests instructed the girls to rise, to present themselves with grace, to recite the prayers and perform the gestures of the Kadisu. Beltane followed the motions, her hands trembling, her voice barely steady. The older girls moved with practiced calm, yet Beltane could see the tension behind their eyes. This was not worship. It was submission under the guise of piety. The men offered silver and grain, and every transaction was recorded meticulously on clay tablets. Beltane's young mind struggled to reconcile the beauty of the temple with the cold precision of its control. In the evenings, Beltane witnessed what the priests never wrote down. Some girls would be taken to private chambers, their names whispered only to those present, never appearing again in the daily rolls. The temple's ledger showed nothing beyond transactions, yet the girls' lives were disappearing in silence. Sapphira, her quiet companion, leaned close one night and whispered, "Every coin they give, every gift they bring, it is a reminder that we belong to them, not Ishtar, not the gods, them." Beltane felt a shiver run down her spine. She had begun to understand the truth. The rituals, the crowns, the titles, they were all tools to convince the world, and the girls themselves, that exploitation was sacred. She had thought that service to Ishtar was an honor. Now she knew it was a carefully constructed trap. Every girl who arrived at the temple was caught, like prey, and every ritual reinforced the chains. One day, a girl named Namtaru, only a few months older than Beltane, vanished from her chamber. The priests announced nothing, recorded nothing. The other girls whispered rumors, but fear silenced certainty. Beltane's heart ached, and for the first time, the reality of the system struck her fully. No one escaped, no matter how clever or desperate, no matter how young. The temple was a machine of control, turning innocence into obedience, childhood into labor, and lives into clay tablets. That night, Beltane lay awake under her rope crown, its fibers digging into her scalp. She thought of her family, of the freedom she had lost, of the stories Sapphira had shared. Fear clung to her like a shadow, but so did a strange sense of determination. The priests could record her body, her labor, her silver, but they could not touch her mind, her memory, her resolve. The temple demanded everything, but Beltane realized that she could hold on to something they could never claim: herself. From that night on, she moved through the temple with careful observation. Every ceremony, every transaction, every ritual was a lesson in survival. She began to understand the subtle ways the priests maintained control and the hidden ways the girls resisted. The system was terrifying, but Beltane was learning the first rule of endurance: knowledge. The more she saw, the more she understood, and the more she understood, the stronger she became, even under the crushing weight of rope and ritual. By now, Beltane had learned to navigate the temple without drawing attention. Every step, every gesture, every word was measured. But beneath the ropes and ritual, a network of quiet resistance was forming. Some of the older Kadisu had discovered ways to communicate in silence, passing notes hidden in robes or exchanging coded gestures during prayers. Beltane began to notice these signals and cautiously joined in. One evening, Sapphira led her to a small, unused chamber deep in the temple's heart. The air was thick with dust, and the shadows made the room feel like it existed outside time itself. Here, the girls spoke freely, their voices hushed but honest. They shared memories of home, stories of families, and whispered fears of the men who came with silver and grain. For Beltane, it was a revelation. She realized she was not alone. These walls that seemed to hold her prisoner also hid others who still remembered what it meant to be human. The girls spoke of the clay tablets, the meticulous records of every interaction. They had begun to piece together how the system worked. Every coin given, every gift recorded, every transaction logged. It was not only proof of service but proof of ownership. The temple preserved everything, yet erased the girls from history. Those who disappeared were carefully removed from the ledgers, their absence explained away as devotion fulfilled, their suffering never acknowledged. The reality was brutal. The system could continue indefinitely because the world outside only saw devotion, never cruelty. Beltane felt a mix of fear and determination. She could not stop the system alone, but she could learn, remember, and survive. Each day, She practiced the rituals with precision, performing for the priests and the visitors, while her mind quietly cataloged the patterns, the hidden weaknesses, and the small moments of rebellion. She noticed which girls were brought in and which disappeared first, which priests were strict and which could be negotiated with, which corners of the temple were less watched. Knowledge became her armor. Even as fear lingered, hope flickered. The small acts of rebellion, the secret sharing of stories, and the tiny moments of laughter gave Beltane strength. She began teaching the younger girls, subtly, how to hide their fear and maintain the appearance of obedience. Survival in the temple was a skill, and she was learning quickly. Her body was trapped in chains of rope and ritual, but her mind was free, and that freedom became a small, vital spark. Yet the shadows carried reminders of the temple's cruelty. Girls she had befriended vanished overnight, their absence a silent warning of what awaited those who failed, hesitated, or were simply unlucky. Beltane held on to Saphira's words, "Remember your name, remember it well." The thought of being erased from memory terrified her, but it also fueled her determination. If she could survive, if she could hold on to her mind and her memory, she could endure this place that claimed everything else. Beltane now understood a terrible truth. The Temple of Ishtar was not a place of worship or honor. It was a system of control, exploitation, and erasure. But even in that darkness, she found light in the shadows, in the quiet rebellion of those who refused to be forgotten, and in the knowledge that survival was not just physical. It was mental, emotional, and deeply human. Time in the temple had changed Beltane. She no longer saw the world with the naive eyes of a 14-year-old. Her body bore the weight of rope crowns and relentless rituals, but her mind had grown sharp, cautious, and unyielding. She had learned to move through the halls unnoticed, to hide fear behind practiced smiles, and to read the subtle cues of priests and visitors alike. Still, every day reminded her that the temple was more than a building. It was a machine of control, consuming innocence and replacing it with obedience. The day began like any other, with chants, prayers, and the arrival of visitors bringing silver and grain. Beltane moved through the rituals mechanically, her mind cataloging everything. Who entered which chamber, who disappeared after which ceremony, which priests kept detailed notes, and which girls were likely to vanish next. She had watched too many of them disappear without a trace, their names erased from the clay tablets, their lives reduced to silence. And yet, Beltane refused to be erased. She clung to her memory, to the names of friends, to the stories of home. That night, Saphira whispered to her in the shadows, her voice trembling, "Another one is gone. Namtaru's name won't appear again." Beltane closed her eyes and swallowed the lump in her throat. She had known this moment would come. The temple consumed everyone in time, one by one, leaving only records and ritual behind. But in the darkness, she whispered her own prayer, not to Ishtar, but to herself. "I will remember. I will not be erased." The girls gathered in the hidden chamber one last time, a small network of living resistance within the temple walls. They shared what they could, holding on to scraps of memory, names, and stories. Each disappearance was a wound, but also a reminder. Survival was not only about enduring with the body but preserving the self, the mind, the soul. Beltane realized that the greatest power the priests and the temple could not touch was memory. Even if her body was trapped, even if her name was erased from the tablets, she could carry the truth of what had happened inside her. The days continued, each one a test of endurance. Beltane performed the rituals flawlessly, welcomed the visitors as expected, and concealed her fear with skill. Yet inside, she remained free in the only way the temple could not control. She remembered. She remembered her village, her family, her friends, the girls who had disappeared, and the truth of the temple's system. This memory became her rebellion, her silent defiance, and her survival. Beltane understood now that the temple had trained her, as it did every girl, to be invisible and obedient. But she also understood that survival was not only about obedience. It was about holding on to one's identity in a place designed to destroy it. She would never forget the rope crowns, the rituals, the recorded transactions, the fear, and the cruelty. She would carry these memories as proof that she had lived, that she had been more than a line on a clay tablet, more than a body claimed by the temple. In the end, Beltane's story was not one of escape or vengeance. It was a story of endurance, of memory as resistance, and of a young girl who refused to let her spirit be erased. The Temple of Ishtar remained a place of devotion outwardly, but in its shadows, Beltane and the other girls had found a way to survive, not through defiance in the world, but through defiance of forgetfulness. In remembering, they preserved the truth that the temple could not record, the lives, the fear, and the courage of those trapped within its golden walls.